Welcome back to Shadow Fear. Before we dive in tonight, I need to warn you, what happened to these tourists in Alaska isn't what you think, not even close. Some of them stepped into the wilderness and simply vanished. Others returned, but not as the same people who left. And one group? No one knows if they ever made it out, or if they're still out there. Watching the next ones go in, these are 7 of the most disturbing true missing tourist cases from Alaska. Real people, real disappearances, and real nightmares that still echo in police reports and sleepless minds. Stories that make seasoned officers quit the force, and survivors pack up and flee the state for good. I won't spoil what's waiting inside each of these stories. You'll have to hear them yourself. But after tonight, you'll understand why some parts of Alaska have warning signs that tourists never take seriously. Until it's too late. If you're new here, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because this is Shadow Fear, where true horror isn't just told, it's remembered. My name's Mike, and I've been a wilderness guide in Alaska for almost 15 years. I've led hikers, photographers, and adventure junkies through every kind of terrain this state can throw at you. Glaciers, mountain passes, frozen lakes, you name it. But the story I'm about to tell you, I wish I could forget it, because this one changed how I see the wilderness, and honestly, I haven't gone back to Denali since. It happened in the summer of 2018, July, to be exact. I remember because it was one of the clearest weeks we'd had all season. No storms, mild wind, and perfect visibility. That kind of weather in Denali National Park is rare, and guides like me make good money when it hits. That week, I'd been hired by a young couple from Oregon, Jason and Erin Miller, newlyweds. They'd been traveling across Alaska for their honeymoon and wanted to hike one of the longer backcountry trails, far from the usual tourist routes. They'd booked a private 2-day trek through an area called the McKinley Ridge, a mix of forest, rocky paths, and open tundra that climbs up toward the lower slopes of the Alaska Range. I met them at the visitor station early in the morning. Jason was one of those upbeat, camera-loving guys, the type who narrates everything for his vlog. Erin was quieter, more observant. She looked around a lot, like she was memorizing every sight and sound. They were both polite, excited, and honestly, a nice break from the usual hikers who think they know everything. Before we started, I went through my usual safety checklist: bear spray, radio, emergency locator, and spare batteries. They had good gear, no red flags. The first few hours went perfectly. The sun was out, and the air had that clean, crisp bite to it. We crossed a few small rivers, stopped to rest near a ridge, and even saw a herd of caribou in the distance. Jason filmed almost everything. I remember him saying, "Man, it's like being on another planet." Erin just smiled. She wasn't saying much, but you could tell she was happy to be there. We made camp near the base of a mountain called Chillock Ridge, a spot with an open view of the valley. Around sunset, the whole sky turned gold and the snowcaps started glowing. It was beautiful, too beautiful to ever associate with what came next. After dinner, the wind picked up a little. Nothing crazy, just a steady hum moving through the trees. Jason took his camera out again, filming the skyline and the fog rolling in. Erin asked if she could hike up a few hundred yards for a better view before dark. It wasn't far and she was fit, so I said okay as long as she didn't go out of sight. Jason followed her, camera in hand, laughing and calling her name as they disappeared behind a small rise. I stayed behind cleaning up the cooking gear. I expected them to be gone maybe 10-15 minutes tops, but half an hour passed. Then 40 minutes. The sky went from gold to blue to black. I called out, no answer. I grabbed my flashlight and started up the ridge, following their footprints. At first it was easy. 2 sets of boot prints in the soft dirt, heading straight up the slope. But about halfway up, I realized something weird. The prints started to space out, like they were walking faster, almost running. And then they just stopped, dead in the middle of the trail. No turn, no split, no backtrack. Just stopped. I swept the light around, nothing. No scuff marks, no dropped gear, no sound except the wind. I stood there for maybe a minute, trying to convince myself I was missing something obvious. That's when I heard it, a sound I still can't describe clearly. It was like a deep hum, but not mechanical. It came from higher up the ridge, echoing through the trees, a vibration that you could almost feel in your chest. Then silence. I called their names again, louder this time. "Jason, Erin!" The wind swallowed my voice. No response. So I climbed higher, flashlight beam shaking. At the top, the fog had rolled in thick to the point where I could barely see 5 feet ahead. The beam cut through it like a knife, and for a second I thought I saw movement. Something tall standing still. I blinked, stepped forward, and it was gone. No footsteps, no outline. Just fog. That's when the radio on my belt hissed. Static, then a faint click, like someone trying to talk but not pressing the button long enough. I responded, "Base, this is Trail Guide 19, do you copy?" More static. Then faintly a voice that sounded like Erin's, whispering something I couldn't make out. I froze. "Erin, is that you?" Silence again. I started backing down the trail. I've been through storms, landslides, even bear encounters, but this was different. It didn't feel natural. Every instinct I had was telling me to leave. I made it back to camp around midnight. Their tent was still zipped, sleeping bags untouched. Jason's pack was missing, but Erin's was sitting by the fire pit. Her phone, half-charged, was inside. I tried calling park rangers through the sat phone. No signal. I barely slept that night. Every time the wind picked up, it sounded like voices drifting through the trees, faint but deliberate. Around 3 a.m. I swore I heard someone laugh, far away but not far enough. Morning finally came, gray and cold. I packed my gear and followed the ridge again in daylight. Nothing. Just those same footprints that ended halfway up. When I reached the top again, the fog was gone, replaced by endless blue sky. I could see miles in every direction. No sign of them. I radioed again, still static. At around noon, I noticed something shiny near a cluster of rocks a bit down the slope. It was Jason's camera, half buried in dirt and moss. The screen was cracked, but it still turned on. I scrolled through the photos. Most were normal, Erin smiling, the mountains their campsite. Then there was one that froze me completely. The last photo, time-stamped just minutes before sunset. It showed Jason and Erin standing together on the ridge, smiling, arms around each other. But behind them, just barely visible in the fog, was a figure, tall, thin, way too tall. Its head brushed the tree line. Its arms were wrong, too long, like they were reaching down past its knees, and it wasn't facing them. It was turned toward the camera. I felt my stomach drop. I looked around, half expecting to see something up there with me. Nothing. Just silence. I hiked back to the visitor station as fast as I could, reaching it just before nightfall. The rangers launched a full search the next morning. Dogs, helicopters, everything. They found nothing. No bodies, no tracks, not even clothing. The only piece of evidence was that camera, which they logged for investigation. They said maybe the couple fell into one of the underground crevices, the kind that get covered by moss and dirt, impossible to see. But if that was the case, why were there no disturbed footprints? Why did their prints end instead of collapse inward? The official report called it accidental disappearance due to natural causes. Case closed. But a few weeks later, a ranger I knew, a guy named Carl, pulled me aside. He said he'd gone through the camera files himself. There was something else, a video clip, only 2 seconds long before the memory card corrupted. I asked what was on it. He said it looked like fog moving fast. But if you slowed it down frame by frame, there was something else in there, something like a face, too large and too pale to be human. Carl quit a month later. Moved to Arizona, told me he'd never set foot in Alaska again. I tried to put it behind me, told myself it was just one of those tragic, unsolved cases that happen out there more often than people realize. But about a year later, I was going through some old GPS data from my guiding routes. I noticed something strange. My tracker from that day, the day Jason and Erin vanished, had glitched around the same time they disappeared. For exactly 7 minutes, the signal jumped back and forth across several miles like it was moving impossibly fast. Then it returned to normal. 7 minutes. Gone, scrambled, untraceable. I stopped guiding after that season. Every time I think about going back, I see that photo in my mind. The two of them smiling, and that thing standing just behind them, almost blending into the fog. And the worst part. Sometimes when I'm alone at night, I still hear the radio hiss to life. Just static, then that faint, breathy whisper, "Mike, are you still there?" After Jason and Erin disappeared, I tried to convince myself I could move on. People go missing in Alaska all the time. It's something every guide learns early. The wilderness doesn't care how prepared you are. A single misstep, a shift in the weather, and it's over. That's what I told myself. But the truth is, that photo haunted me. The one with the thing in the fog. I'd wake up at night and see it in my head. That tall figure just standing there, not moving, not even blurred, like it was posing for the camera. The rangers said it was a trick of the mist, a distortion from low light. I wanted to believe that. I really did. Then, about 6 months later, I got a call from Ranger Carl, the one who'd looked at the video before quitting. He was living in Arizona by then, but he couldn't sleep either. Said he still had nightmares about the sound he'd heard in that 2-second clip. I asked what kind of sound, and he hesitated before saying, "It's not something I can describe, Mike. It's like hearing something too far away but inside your head at the same time." A few days after that call, I got a small package in the mail. No return address, no note. Inside was a USB drive and a single Polaroid photo. The Polaroid was of the ridge, the same one from Denali, but taken from a different angle. I knew it immediately because of the shape of the tree line and the slope. There was something dark in the background, almost like a human shadow stretching upward into the sky. I plugged in the USB drive. It contained one file. Camera restored. Move. The timestamp showed it was recovered from the same memory card the Rangers had logged as damaged. I hesitated before pressing play. The video started shaky, the lens facing the ground, Jason's voice laughing as he said something about the view. Then Erin appeared, smiling. She said, "You can't even see the end of it, can you?" The wind picked up and the mic started to distort. Jason turned the camera around to face the ridge. For a moment, all you could see was fog rolling over the trees. Then something in the mist shifted. It wasn't just blowing in the wind, it was moving with purpose. The camera zoomed in. Jason whispered, "What the hell is that?" Right before the footage cut off, Erin gasped and said, "Jason, behind you." The screen went black. I sat there for a long time, staring at the monitor. I don't know how long. I called the park office the next day, told them what I'd received. They said they'd look into it, but when I asked about the package a week later, they told me they never got it. The file was gone from my computer too. Deleted somehow. Even the temporary folder was empty. I should have stopped digging there, but I didn't. I went back to Denali in the spring of 2020, just before the lockdowns. I told myself I needed closure. But really, I think I was looking for proof that what I'd seen wasn't real. I brought 2 friends from the guide service, Travis and Nolan, both experienced outdoorsmen. I didn't tell them the full story, just that a couple had gone missing there, and I wanted to retrace the route. We left early in the morning, following the same trail I'd taken with Jason and Erin. It was colder than before, and most of the area was still covered in snow patches. About halfway through the hike, my GPS started acting up again, jumping coordinates, losing signal. Nolan joked that Denali was cursed, and I laughed it off, but my stomach was in knots. By late afternoon, we reached the ridge. The same one, the same silence. It's hard to describe, but there's a kind of stillness there that doesn't feel natural. Even the birds don't sing. You can hear your own pulse if you stand still long enough. We found nothing the first day, just the remains of an old fire pit. Not mine, but someone else's. The wood was half burnt, frozen solid. Travis said it looked like someone had left in a hurry. We camped nearby, setting up tents in a tight circle. That night, I woke up to the sound of crunching snow. At first I thought it was Nolan stepping out to relieve himself, but the sound was too heavy. Slow, deliberate steps circling the tent. I reached for my flashlight, hand shaking, and whispered his name. No answer. The steps stopped. Then, from the other side of the nylon, something brushed against the tent wall. A long drag, like fingers trailing across the surface. Travis whispered from his tent, "Mike, do you hear that?" I whispered back, "Stay quiet." For a few seconds there was nothing, and then this low vibrating hum filled the air. It wasn't wind. It came from the ground itself, like the earth was resonating. It lasted maybe 10 seconds, then everything went dead silent again. Morning came. Nolan was gone. His tent was zipped from the inside, but empty. His boots were still there, his pack was gone. We searched for hours, calling his name until our voices broke. We found a single trail of footprints heading toward the ridge, just his, but halfway up they ended. Same place Jason and Erin's did. Travis wanted to leave. He was pale, shaking. I told him we'd mark the location and get help. But when I turned around, I realized something that made my blood run cold. Our tents, our gear, our own footprints, gone. Like the snow had melted and refrozen perfectly smooth, we hiked down fast, barely talking. The GPS kept glitching the whole way, flickering between coordinates that didn't exist. Once we got back to the park road, everything started working normally again. Signal, compass, all of it. We reported Nolan missing immediately. Search teams went out again just like before. And just like before, they found nothing. A month later, I got another call. This time from a woman named Lydia, who claimed to be Erin's sister. She said she'd received something in the mail, a memory card with no note. She asked if I could help her open it. I agreed. When we loaded the files, there was only one photo, not of Erin, not of Jason. It was of me. It showed me standing at the base of the ridge, the same day they vanished. The angle was from behind, like someone was watching me from the trees. I know I never turned around, never saw anyone there. But in the photo over my shoulder you can see a blur, tall, pale, almost translucent, leaning out from behind a tree. I asked Lydia where she got it. She said it came from an Alaskan address, but the postmark was smudged beyond reading. The envelope smelled faintly like pine. That night I dreamed I was back on the ridge. Everything was grey, no sound, no wind, just me, standing where their footprints ended. And from the fog, a shape started to form, too tall, too still. It didn't move, didn't breathe, but I could feel it watching. Then I heard a whisper right behind me, "Stay!" I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat. My radio, the same one from the trip, was on. Static, faint at first, then clearer. And through the hiss came a voice, low and calm. "Mike, it's so quiet up here. I threw the radio away the next morning. I stopped guiding for good after that, sold most of my gear, moved south to Anchorage, took a job at a hardware store. I haven't gone camping since. Every once in a while I'll get messages online from other guides, stories about hikers who disappear near the same ridge, same pattern, footprints that end abruptly, missing gear, electronics malfunctioning. The Park Service always blames the weather or terrain, but I know better. I've heard rumors, even from locals, stories going back decades about something old that lives out there. They don't call it by name, just the Watcher in the Fog. They say it's not a spirit or an animal, but something in between, something that shows up when people go too far from the path. Sometimes, when I'm closing up shop late at night, I'll catch a glimpse of fog rolling through the parking lot. It shouldn't be there, not in the middle of summer. But I'll see it anyway, drifting slow, almost like it's moving with intent. And every single time I hear the same faint hum. A few weeks ago I got another envelope in the mail, no return address. Inside, one photograph. It was the ridge again, same place. Only this time there were 3 figures standing together in the fog. Jason, Erin and Nolan, all smiling. And just behind them, barely visible through the mist, was a 4th shape. Taller than the rest, looking straight at the camera. My name's Ryan, and I still don't know what exactly happened to my best friend Evan that weekend near Talkeetna. It's been almost 4 years now, but I still wake up some nights thinking I can hear him knocking. We were both in college at the University of Alaska Anchorage, juniors at the time. Evan was my roommate and my closest friend, the kind of guy who could talk his way into or out of anything. He was funny, confident, always up for something new. I was the opposite, quieter, more cautious. That's probably why we balanced each other out. It was late February when he got the idea. We'd been buried in assignments and midterms, and he wanted to get out for a bit, as he put it. A weekend somewhere quiet, off-grid, just us, a few beers and the northern lights. I wasn't really a camping guy, but he found this listing online for a cabin near Talkeetna, about 2 hours north. Said it was old but fully stocked, with a wood stove, generator and decent reviews. The owner rented it out mostly to hikers and hunters, and the price was dirt cheap for 2 nights. The photos showed this small red cabin surrounded by trees, maybe half a mile from the nearest road. The listing said rustic charm, No Wi-Fi, no phone service. Perfect for peace and quiet. I remember joking, perfect place to get murdered, and Evan just laughed and said, "That's the point, man." No stress, no people. We left early Friday morning. It was one of those bleak Alaskan days when the clouds sit low and everything looks washed out. The drive was long but peaceful. Empty roads, snow-covered trees, and patches of sunlight breaking through. We had music playing, coffee in the cup holders, and that feeling you get before a mini-adventure. Excited but not expecting anything serious. By the time we reached the turn-off road, the signal had dropped completely. Just us in the forest. We followed a narrow dirt trail lined with birch and spruce until we saw it. The cabin. It looked almost identical to the photos. Small, red, a little worn, with a steep roof and a single window in front. There was a faded sign nailed to a tree near the door that said, "Wendell's Rest." Inside it was simple but cozy. A small kitchen, a living room with a wood stove, and a narrow staircase leading to a loft with 2 sleeping bags. There was a faint smell of old wood and something else. Not bad, just earthy like damp soil. Evan immediately started recording a video for his vlog. Nothing serious, just the kind of thing he liked to post for friends. He panned around the room saying, "If I die here, this is Exhibit A." I told him to shut up and start unpacking. We spent the rest of the afternoon chopping firewood and setting up. The air was colder than I expected. You could see your breath even inside with the stove burning. Around sunset, we took a short walk behind the cabin. The trees were dense and tall, and the snow muffled every sound. No birds, no wind, just that heavy stillness that makes you whisper without realizing it. That's when Evan pointed out something weird. Small prints in the snow. They looked like handprints, not footprints. Tiny like a child's, dozens of them scattered between the trees leading toward the cabin. I laughed it off, said it was probably some animal or weird melting pattern, but even then something about it made my skin crawl. We went back inside as it got dark. Made dinner, opened a few beers, and played cards near the stove. Around 9 p.m. we started hearing noises outside, faint taps against the walls like branches brushing the cabin. It wasn't windy, so I figured it was just the wood contracting in the cold. Evan joked that maybe the forest kids wanted in. Then something tapped on the window. Not loud, just 2 slow knocks. Tap, tap, we froze. Evan grinned, pretending to be brave, but I could see his hand tremble slightly. He grabbed the flashlight and walked to the window. The glass was fogged up, so he wiped it with his sleeve. Nothing, just the dark reflection of the trees. He shrugged and said, "Guess they left." We both laughed it off, but I couldn't shake the unease. That night I barely slept. The cabin creaked constantly, and I kept hearing faint noises, like whispers too soft to make out. Around 2 a.m. I woke to the sound of the front door handle clicking. Once, then again. I held my breath. It stopped. In the morning, Evan acted like nothing happened. Made coffee, joked about my paranoia, and said he wanted to check out a frozen creek we'd seen on the way in. I followed him reluctantly. The sun was out, and the snow sparkled in that almost blinding way. For a while it actually felt normal again. Then we found the prints. Not far from the cabin, under the trees, dozens of small handprints pressed deep into the snow. They weren't random either. They formed a circle. Perfectly round, maybe 10 feet across. Evan crouched down, laughing nervously, and said, "Okay, that's creepy." He took a few photos, but I told him to delete them. Something about it didn't feel right. That night things got worse. It started with the knocking again, only this time it came from inside the walls. Slow, rhythmic, like something crawling between the wood panels. Evan banged the wall with his fist and shouted, "Hey, quit it!" The knocking stopped instantly. We both stood there silent. Then, from the ceiling above us came a faint, deliberate knock-knock. 2 taps, then 2 more. Evan laughed, but it sounded forced. Guess it answered. I told him we should leave first thing in the morning. He agreed, but only after 1 last beer. Around midnight, the generator died, and the lights went out. We lit the lantern and sat near the stove. The air felt different, heavier, charged somehow. Evan was scrolling through his camera, showing me the day's photos. Then he frowned. "That's weird," he said. He zoomed in on one shot and the photo of the handprint circle. Only now there were figures standing between the trees. Faint, blurry shapes, almost transparent, child-sized. There had been nothing there when he took the picture. I told him to delete it. He didn't. We went upstairs to sleep, but I couldn't close my eyes. I kept hearing faint footsteps below, light ones moving slowly across the floorboards. I nudged Evan awake, but he just mumbled, "Probably animals," and turned over. Around 3 a.m. I smelled dirt. Wet, fresh earth. Then something touched my foot, cold and damp. I bolted upright. There was nothing there, but the smell was stronger now, filling the whole loft. That's when the knocking started again. Not from the walls this time, or from under the floor. Slow, steady knocks like something trying to get out. Evan whispered, "It's answering back." We didn't sleep after that. When morning came, the generator still wouldn't start, and the car battery was dead. I don't even remember packing, just running. We hiked to the main road, flagged down a truck, and didn't stop until we hit Anchorage. We both promised not to tell anyone what happened. We didn't even tell the owner, just left a message saying we'd had issues with wildlife. Evan stopped talking about it completely after that weekend. For a while I thought maybe we'd imagined the whole thing. Stress, exhaustion, cabin fever, whatever. Then a month later, Evan called me late at night. He sounded scared, whispering. He said he could hear knocking again. Said it started faint but was getting louder every night. I told him to leave his apartment, but he hung up before I could finish. The next day I went to check on him. His car was in the lot. His lights were on. But he wasn't there. What I did find was his phone sitting on the counter, still recording a voice memo. The last few seconds were just silence. Then a faint sound and 2 soft knocks, a tap, tap, and a child's voice whispering, "Can we come in now?" The next morning started off quiet, too quiet. When I woke up, sunlight was spilling through the frosted window, painting the cabin in that cold, golden light you only get in Alaska. For a second I thought maybe the weird noises, the voice, all of it, had just been some late-night paranoia. But then I saw the footprints, dozens of them, small, muddy, scattered across the kitchen floor. They weren't there last night. I nudged Ryan awake and pointed. He blinked a few times before his face went pale. "What the hell?" he whispered. We followed them, careful not to step on them, and noticed something that made my stomach turn. They didn't lead in from the door. They started near the center of the room and trailed toward the hallway, disappearing into the floorboards. We both stood there in silence for a while, listening. The house creaked, but it was different now, heavier, like something was shifting just out of sight. Ryan grabbed his phone, tried to open the camera, but it froze. The battery icon flickered even though it was fully charged a few minutes ago. "Screw this," he muttered. "We're leaving." But when we went to pack our things, we realized the front door wouldn't open. The lock turned, but the door itself wouldn't budge, like something heavy was pressed against it from outside. I tried the windows, same thing. Sealed shut. We decided to wait it out, thinking maybe it was just the snow. Ryan said he'd go check the back for another way out. He was gone maybe 2 minutes before I heard him yell. I sprinted around the corner and found him standing in the hallway, staring at the wall. "What the hell is that?" he said. I followed his gaze and felt my throat go dry. There were handprints on the wall, small smeared ones, like a dozen muddy palms pressed against the wood. And they weren't dry, they looked fresh. "You did this last night," I said, but even as I said it, I knew he hadn't. He shook his head. "No, they weren't here." The air inside felt heavy now, humid somehow, like the cabin was breathing. Ryan started filming again, pacing slowly through the room, whispering to himself. "If this is some sick joke, whoever you are, we're done." That's when the knock came. One soft tap on the back door. We froze, another knock. Then another. Then a child's laugh, high-pitched and short, like someone trying to copy what a kid might sound like. Ryan called out, "Who's there?" The voice answered immediately. "Can we come in?" But it didn't sound like a child anymore. It was deeper, slower, and layered, like multiple voices speaking at once. We ran to the back door, grabbed the handle, and felt it vibrating under our palms. Something was pressing from the other side. I could hear tiny fingers tapping against the wood, dozens of them. Then silence. When we finally dared to open the door, there was nothing there. Just the white stretch of snow, and a set of small footprints leading away into the tree line. "We're leaving," I said. "I don't care how." We grabbed our jackets and shoved our things into backpacks. Ryan tried the door again, and this time it opened like nothing had ever been wrong. Outside everything was still. No birds, no wind, just the sound of snow crunching beneath our boots. We followed the narrow trail back toward the main road, our breath steaming in the air. Every few steps, Ryan would look behind us. Finally, I asked what he was doing. "They're following," he said quietly. I looked back, and for a second, I thought I saw something. A small figure standing near the edge of the trees. Short, thin, with arms hanging too long at its sides. When I blinked, it was gone. We walked faster. By the time we reached the car, my hands were shaking so badly I dropped the keys twice. Ryan didn't say a word. He just kept staring at the tree line. When the engine finally turned over, I exhaled so hard I almost laughed. But then as we started backing out, the radio flickered on by itself, static. Then a voice. It was quiet at first, then clearer, childlike. "You forgot something." We both froze. "Turn it off," I said. Ryan slammed his fist against the button, but the static only got louder. "You forgot something," it repeated. Then we heard a knock from inside the trunk. Ryan stopped the car, jumped out, and opened it. Nothing, just our bags. But the snow around the back of the car, there were prints. Tiny, barefoot prints leading up to the bumper. We didn't say a word after that. We just drove. We didn't stop until we hit Talkeetna. We checked into a cheap roadside motel, and neither of us spoke the rest of the night. Around 3 a.m., I heard Ryan get up to use the bathroom. The floor creaked, then went silent. I waited a minute. Then two. "You okay?" I called out. No answer. I got up and knocked on the bathroom door. "Ryan!" When I opened it, the light was flickering, and the mirror was fogged over even though the shower wasn't on. On the glass, written with a finger, were 3 words: "You let us in." I stumbled back, heart hammering, and ran out into the room. Ryan was gone. His jacket, shoes, phone, everything still there. I called the front desk, told them my friend was missing, but by the time they came up, there was no sign of him. Not even footprints outside the door. The police came later that morning. I told them everything. The cabin, the voices, the prints, but they didn't believe me. They said we must have gotten lost, panicked, maybe hallucinated from stress or lack of sleep. They sent a team out to check the cabin anyway. When they came back, the lead officer looked pale. He didn't say much, but I overheard one of them mention something about the walls. A few weeks later, I got a call from one of the search guys. He said they found the cabin empty, door wide open. Inside, the walls were covered. Hundreds of muddy handprints, all child-sized, leading upward to the ceiling. They looked fresh, even though no one had been there in days. And the weirdest part? In the middle of the living room floor, they found Ryan's phone, screen cracked but still recording. The last few seconds of footage showed the inside of the motel bathroom mirror, and behind the reflection of the foggy glass was a shape. Short, thin, and standing just behind him. I moved out of Alaska not long after that. I don't hike anymore, and I don't stay anywhere that doesn't have neighbors within shouting distance. But sometimes, late at night, I swear I still hear that sound. The faint tapping of tiny hands against the wall, waiting for someone to answer back. My name's Derek, and for most of my life I thought flying over Alaska was one of the most beautiful things a person could do. I've been a pilot for 12 years, tour flights mostly, taking people over glaciers, valleys, and the kind of untouched wilderness you only ever see in postcards. But I don't fly anymore. Not since Flight 217. Not since I heard what was on that black box. It was mid-June, one of those clear days where the sky looks endless and the light hits the snowcaps just right. I'd flown that route 100 times, from Anchorage over the Wrangell Range, a quick sightseeing loop for tourists chasing the real Alaska, the kind of flight where everyone wants a window seat. That morning I had 5 passengers, 2 older couples from Oregon, and a young guy from Chicago who said he was making a travel vlog. They were all in high spirits when they boarded. I remember one of the men, Ken I think, joking that we were flying straight into Bigfoot country. We all laughed. Takeoff was smooth. I kept the chatter light, pointing out glaciers and valleys through the headset. About 40 minutes in, we were over Wrangell St. Elias National Park. Nothing but endless white and jagged peaks below us. The weather report had mentioned a possible system moving in later that day, but at the time everything was perfect. Clear skies, no turbulence, no sign of anything unusual. The last radio transmission I sent that morning was routine. Wrangell Tower. This is Tour Flight 217, maintaining 6,000. Visibility clear. The controller replied, "Copy that. 217. Report back when you cross the glacier shelf. I said I would. But Flight 217 never called back. I wasn't the one flying that day. It was my co-pilot, Jeff. I was supposed to take the next rotation. When they didn't return on time, we all thought it was just a mechanical issue or maybe a forced landing. Happens sometimes out there. Whiteout conditions, a frozen line, radio interference. But the hours passed and there was nothing. No Mayday call, no signal, no radar return. The plane had just vanished. Search and rescue launched within the hour. For days they scoured the range. Helicopters, snowmobiles, drones, nothing. Not even a piece of wing or debris. The families came to the airfield every day, asking questions we couldn't answer. I remember one of the wives saying, "He texted me right before they took off. He said it was the clearest sky he'd ever seen." 8 days later, a backcountry hiker radioed in something strange. He'd found what looked like a piece of fuselage near a ridge, about 30 miles east of where Flight 217 should have been. When rescue teams reached the site, they confirmed it. It was the tail section. But here's the thing. It wasn't burned or torn apart like you'd expect from a crash. It looked like it had been set down carefully, almost placed there. And there were footprints in the snow around it, hundreds of them. But they weren't boot prints. They were barefoot. The recovery team found the cockpit voice recorder still intact inside the tail, the black box. I wasn't supposed to hear it, but I did. When you've been flying with the same crew for years, you get access to things you shouldn't. Late one night, one of the maintenance guys slipped me a copy of the audio. "You didn't get this from me," he said. "I listened to it in my truck, parked in the lot behind the hangar, the snow coming down in fat, silent flakes. It starts off normal, engine hum, a bit of turbulence, laughter from the passengers. You can hear Jeff making small talk. 'If you look to your right, that's the Nebesna Glacier.' Then there's some light chatter between the tourists. The young guy, Evan, asks if it's true that you can see Russia from some peaks. Jeff jokes, 'Only if you've got binoculars.' Everyone laughs. For the first 10 minutes, it's nothing but harmless noise. Then something shifts. You hear Jeff say, 'What's that?' One of the passengers asks what he means, and Jeff replies, 'That light out there, on the snow.' Another voice says, 'I see it too.' The laughter dies down. For a few seconds, it's just the sound of the engine and someone breathing close to the mic. Then the woman says, 'It's moving.' I remember gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles hurt. The next part, I still can't explain it. You hear Jeff radio the tower. 'Wrangell Tower, this is 217. We're seeing what looks like a flare or a reflection on the glacier below.' The tower replies that there are no other flights in the area. Jeff sounds confused, says it's not a plane. It's bright, white, moving uphill. Then static cuts in for a few seconds. When the feed clears, there's shouting in the background. One of the men says, 'There's something outside.' It doesn't make sense. They were 6,000 feet up, but you can hear it clearly. There's something walking outside. The black box records a scraping sound next, like metal against metal. Then something hits the fuselage hard. The cabin mics pick up a woman crying, someone shouting for Jeff to turn around, but the engines are still steady. You hear Jeff say, "Everyone stay calm, it's just turbulence." And then there's a sound, a deep, low groan. Not the plane, not the wind. Something else. Something that vibrated through the speakers like it was right behind me. After that, there's a series of loud bangs like footsteps on the fuselage. Someone whispers, "It's on the wing." Then static, the last 30 seconds are chaos. Screams, the engine spiking, Jeff shouting for Mayday. Then something hits the plane again, harder this time. A tearing sound, metal screaming. And then silence. Just the faint sound of wind. Then faintly, barely audible, a voice. A man's voice, but wrong somehow. Distant, hollow. It says, "We're still flying." That was it. The recording ends there. No crash, no impact, no explosion. Just those words. The official report said the plane went down due to unknown weather conditions. The families were told the wreckage likely sank into a crevasse. But everyone who heard that tape knew better. Whatever happened up there, it wasn't weather. 2 weeks later, the rest of the plane was found, or what was left of it. The fuselage was sitting upright in a valley, like it had been dropped from a few feet up. The strange part? The cabin door was open. Inside, the seats were empty. No blood, no bodies, no sign of struggle. Just 5 seatbelts unbuckled and one headset lying on the floor. The search team said it looked like everyone just got up and walked out. But there were no tracks this time. Not human ones anyway. Around the plane in the snow were patterns, circular impressions perfectly spaced, like something with long limbs had knelt or crawled around it. They covered a 50-foot radius. Then, beyond that, nothing. Just smooth, untouched snow stretching for miles. The recovery crew stayed overnight to catalogue the site, but when they came back the next morning, the circles in the snow were gone. Fresh snow hadn't fallen. The patterns had just vanished. I didn't sleep for days after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those white peaks and heard that voice, "We're still flying." I told myself it was interference. A trick of the radio, but deep down I knew better. A month later, Evan's camera, the one from the young tourist, was found about 10 miles from the crash site. It was half buried in snow, lens cracked, but the memory card still worked. I wasn't supposed to see the footage, but by then nobody cared about protocols. The footage showed their last hour. Shots of the mountains, everyone smiling, laughing. Then it turns toward the window, and for just a second you can see something reflected in the glass. It's hard to describe. It looked like a figure walking parallel to the plane, matching its speed, only it wasn't touching the ground. It moved like it was pacing along an invisible surface beside them. Then the screen went white. That's where part one ends, because that's when I realized whatever happened to them up there wasn't over. The night I watched that footage, I went home, turned off every light and just sat in silence. But then I heard it, coming from outside my window. A soft tapping, rhythmic, steady, like footsteps on metal. After that night, I didn't go back to work. I told the flight company I was taking some time off, but really, I just couldn't bring myself to step inside another cockpit. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the reflection from that camera. Something walking beside the plane like it didn't belong to this world, like it was waiting for the right moment to reach in. I told myself it was all coincidence, tricks of light, audio distortion. But I knew. Deep down, I knew something about Flight 217 wasn't natural. About a week later, one of the NTSB investigators, a guy named O'Connell, asked if I'd meet him for coffee. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. We sat in a quiet diner just outside Anchorage. He didn't even touch his drink. After a few minutes of silence, he said, "You listened to the recorder, didn't you?" I didn't answer, but he nodded anyway, like he already knew. "There's something you need to hear," he said, and slid a flash drive across the table. That night, I plugged it into my laptop. The file was audio only, labeled 217 post. It was short, about 30 seconds long, and dated 2 days after the black box recording ended. At first, it was just static. Then faintly, I heard wind, a slow, hollow whistle like air moving through a tunnel. Then in the background, footsteps crunching in snow, someone breathing heavily. Then a voice, Jeff's voice. "If anyone finds this, we're not where we should be." He sounded terrified, whispering like he was trying not to be heard. "It's been light for too long," he said. "The sun hasn't gone down." Then a pause and a low rumbling sound. The next words chilled me to my core. "They're walking again." That was it. The file ended. No timestamp, no coordinates, nothing else. Just those words. I called O'Connell right after. He didn't pick up. The next morning, I found out he'd been found dead in his home. Heart attack, they said. But he was only 45, healthy as a horse. His wife told reporters he'd been having nightmares about mountains that moved. I tried to tell myself I was done with it, that it was time to move on. But something kept pulling me back. Curiosity, guilt, maybe both. I started digging into other missing flights over Wrangell St. Elias. You'd be shocked how many there are. Planes that just vanished. No wreckage, no signal, nothing. Some dating back to the 1970s. Same area. Same altitude. A pattern started to form. In almost every case, the pilots reported strange lights or moving shadows on the snow before going silent. I even found a few old Ranger reports from the 80s, accounts of seeing tracks on high ridges where no person or vehicle could have reached. The descriptions were all the same. Long oval impressions, like something huge and bipedal had walked there. I thought maybe I was losing it. Then one night around 2 a.m., I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, there was nothing but static. Then faintly a voice came through. It sounded like Jeff. "Derek," it said, "don't fly over the range." The line went dead. I sat there for a long time staring at my phone. My first thought was that someone was playing a sick prank, but the call log showed the number as no signal origin, no area code, no location. Just that. The next morning, I drove to the hangar where the wreckage of Flight 217 was stored. The recovery team had brought back what they could, a few wings, some seating, and the cockpit shell. It was all tagged for analysis, sealed behind a chain-link gate. The guard on duty was an old friend. I told him I needed to see it for closure. He hesitated, then let me in. Inside, the metal still smelled faintly of fuel and frost. The windows were cracked, and snowmelt had formed tiny puddles beneath the wreckage. I walked around slowly, running my hand along the fuselage. That's when I noticed it. Scratches, faint but deliberate, etched into the side near the rear exit. Letters. Words. "We're still flying." I stumbled back so fast I almost tripped. The letters were carved deep, jagged. Whoever did it must have used a knife or a piece of metal. But that wasn't possible. No one had been found at the site, no bodies, no tools, nothing. I took a photo, but when I looked at it on my phone, the words didn't show up. Just the metal surface, smooth and bare. I snapped another shot. Same thing. I left right after that, heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. For the next few nights, I barely slept. Every sound felt amplified. The hum of the fridge, the ticking of the clock. Then came the dreams. I'd be sitting in the cockpit again, the engine humming beneath me, sunlight hitting the mountains. Everything calm. Then I'd hear it, the footsteps, soft at first like someone walking along the wing, then heavier, louder. When I turned to look, there'd be something outside the window. A figure, long and thin, face hidden behind the glare of the sun, pacing alongside us in mid-air. I woke up drenched in sweat every time, but the worst part was what came after. I'd still hear it. The faint tapping sound on the roof. Like something walking above me, step by slow step. A few days later, I drove out toward the Wrangell Range myself. I don't even know why. Maybe I needed proof that it was just my imagination. The road grew narrower, snow heavier, sky darker. By the time I reached the lookout point near Nebesna Glacier, the sun was dipping low. I got out, breath fogging in the cold, and stared at the endless stretch of white ahead. Silence, not even wind. Then, from somewhere deep in the valley, came a low sound. A rumble that seemed to move through the ground itself. I told myself it was just shifting ice. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. A line of dark shapes far out across the snow, walking slowly uphill. Too big to be human, too smooth in their movement. They didn't leave tracks. I blinked and they were gone. I drove home as fast as the icy road allowed. That night, I packed a bag and booked a flight out of Alaska. But the next morning, when I got to the airport, the departure screen froze mid-refresh. Every other flight updated except mine. The screen just said, Flight 217, boarding. There hasn't been a Flight 217 since the crash. I left anyway. I haven't been back since. I live in Oregon now, near the coast, far from the mountains. But some nights when the fog rolls in and the wind howls just right, I swear I can hear it again. That faint humming like propellers spinning in the distance. Last week I got another voicemail. No number, no timestamp. Just static, then a voice, calm, familiar, hollow. "We're still flying," it said. And under that, barely audible, came something else. A whisper, overlapping itself again and again until it didn't sound like a voice at all. It sounded like wind against metal. Like something walking on the outside of a plane, still moving, even after it should have fallen. I deleted the message. But that night when I went to bed, I could hear it again. Faint tapping on the roof above me. Steady, rhythmic, like footsteps. And when I looked out my window, I could see the reflection of something in the glass. A shape, long and thin, pacing through the air just above the trees, following the sound of the wind. My name's Daniel Reeves. I'm a wildlife photographer. Or at least that's what I was before what happened at Lake Iliamna last winter. I've spent most of my adult life chasing beauty in places most people would never dare to go. Alaska was my favorite. Its raw silence, endless white landscapes, and the kind of cold that makes you feel like you're standing on the edge of the world. It always drew me in. I'd been working on a series about Alaskan winter wildlife for National Geographic submissions. Wolves, moose, bald eagles, the whole thing. But there was one shot I'd never been able to get, an eagle feeding at dawn over the frozen lake. I told myself this would be my final trip for the season. I should have known better. I arrived at Iliamna in late February. The village was small, barely 200 people, if that. And half of them were seasonal fishers or hunters who'd already packed up and gone. I rented a small cabin from a man named Lewis, an old local with a weathered face and a permanent smell of smoke on his clothes. When I told him I wanted to photograph wildlife near the lake, he gave me this long, uneasy look. "You're welcome to try," he said, "but don't stay out there after dark. The lake freezes, but it's not dead." I laughed it off at the time, thinking it was just local superstition. He didn't laugh back. The first 2 days were uneventful. I set up my motion-triggered cameras near the lakeshore, where animal tracks were most visible. I'd spend hours sitting quietly in the cold, the wind biting through my gloves as the daylight slowly shifted from silver to orange to black. The silence was absolute. No birds, no cracking ice, nothing. Just me and the frozen expanse. On the third night, something odd happened. I was reviewing the day's footage on my laptop when I noticed one of the cameras had been triggered around midnight. There were no animals in sight, just a faint shimmer of light on the ice like something moving beneath the surface. I thought it was a reflection at first, maybe moonlight, but the angle didn't make sense. It was too deliberate. Like something alive was swimming under there. That night I couldn't sleep. Every sound outside the cabin felt amplified. The creak of the timbers, the occasional thud of snow sliding off the roof. Around 3 a.m. I heard something else, a hollow, slow knock, 3 times, coming from the direction of the lake. I told myself it was ice cracking. I even tried to laugh it off. But my skin crawled and I didn't open the door. When I checked the next morning, the snow was untouched. No tracks, no signs of anyone being there. The next few days, I got bolder. I moved my main camera setup closer to the lake's center, where the ice was thickest. I even drilled a few test holes to measure the depth, about 8 inches of solid ice. Safe enough, I told myself. But as I was setting up the last camera, I noticed faint markings under the surface, like streaks or handprints pressed against the underside of the ice. I crouched down to look closer, my breath fogging up the lens. They weren't animal prints. They were human, small ones, child-sized. I pulled back fast, heart pounding, telling myself it was just some weird natural pattern, bubbles, cracks, or shadows. But when I looked again, they were gone, like the ice had shifted, or something beneath it had moved. That's when I decided to pack up for the day. Back at the cabin, I tried to focus on editing. But when I loaded the SD card from the camera I'd placed near the lake, my stomach dropped. The footage from the last night showed me kneeling beside the ice. I'd forgotten it was recording. In the background, behind me, something faintly reflected in the ice. A shadow. At first, I thought it was a trick of light. But as I scrubbed the video frame by frame, I realized it was shaped like a person, tall, unmoving, and slightly distorted, as though standing beneath the ice. I told myself it was nothing. Just a reflection, but deep down I knew it wasn't, and I should have left right then. Instead, I decided to go back the next night, to get a better shot, to prove to myself it wasn't real. Photographers are stubborn that way. We chase what we don't understand. Before heading out, I told Lewis where I was going. He looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "You're talking about the lake at night?" he asked. When I nodded, he said, "Don't look down if you hear anything. Don't answer if it calls your name." I laughed it off again, but this time he didn't even smile. He just muttered, "It remembers faces." That evening, I set up a tripod with my main camera aimed directly at the frozen lake. The wind was low and the sky was filled with auroras, green waves dancing over the darkness. It was almost peaceful. I took a few still shots, checked the framing, and waited. An hour passed. Then another. And that's when I started hearing it, faint tapping, from under the ice. At first, I thought it was just the lake shifting, but the rhythm was too precise. 3 taps, a pause, 3 more, then silence. I felt something cold crawl up my spine. So I stepped closer, crouched down, and placed my glove against the ice. The tapping stopped, but then I heard a sound that didn't belong out there in the cold. A voice whispering, muffled like it was coming from deep below. I couldn't make out words, but it sounded like laughter. Childlike, echoing beneath the frozen surface. That's when my camera flashed, a motion detected. I turned toward it, and for a second I thought I saw movement under the ice, like something crawling. I stumbled backward, heart hammering, scanning the surface. Nothing, just smooth, unbroken ice stretching into darkness. But when I looked down again, I saw my reflection and another one beside it. Taller, standing right next to me. I ran. I didn't look back until I reached the cabin, slamming the door shut and shoving a chair against it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unzip my coat. I stayed awake the rest of the night, staring at the door, listening. Nothing followed me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching. The next morning, I packed everything. Cameras, memory cards, gear, all of it. I didn't even check the footage. I just wanted out. But when I went outside, the first thing I saw made my blood run cold. All around the cabin, circling it in the snow, were small footprints. Dozens of them, child-sized. Leading from the lake to my door and stopping there, I left that same hour. Never even told Lewis goodbye. I drove until I hit Anchorage, turned in my rental and flew home the next day. I didn't touch my camera bag for weeks, but eventually curiosity got the better of me. One night, I pulled out the SD card from that last trip and opened the final photo I took, the one right before I ran. It showed me standing on the ice, my flashlight beam bouncing off the surface. And beneath me, just visible through the ice, was a face, pale, pressed against the underside of the frozen sheet. Its eyes were open, looking straight up. And the worst part? There were more faces behind it. They found Daniel's truck 6 days after he vanished. It was parked by the lake, half buried in snow, keys still in the ignition. The fuel tank was empty, but the battery wasn't dead. His camera equipment was gone, but the footprints around the truck told a strange story, one set leading out toward the lake, and none coming back. My name's Eric Lawson. I'm a volunteer with the Alaska Search and Rescue Team out of Dillingham, and I was one of the people sent to find him. I'd heard about Daniel Reeves before, a National Geographic freelancer, one of those guys who made a living freezing their fingers off in the wild to get that one perfect shot. Everyone respected him. Nobody thought he'd just walk out onto a frozen lake in the middle of the night without reason. But when we arrived, the whole situation felt wrong from the start. The lake was quiet, too quiet even for Alaska in February. The wind barely moved. You couldn't hear the trees, the ice, not even the usual groaning and cracking beneath the surface. It was like the whole place was holding its breath. We set up camp near the shoreline and started our sweep at sunrise. The ice was solid, 8 inches thick, maybe more, and we found his tripod about 30 feet from the bank, half frozen into the surface. The camera was still mounted on it. I remember kneeling beside it, brushing snow off the casing, when my partner Julie muttered, "He must have been filming when he went under." That's when I noticed the lens was pointed downward, not outward, like Daniel had been recording the ice itself. I took out the SD card and slipped it into my pocket. The rest of his gear, a bag, a thermos, a glove, was scattered nearby. But there were no signs of a struggle, no broken ice, no cracks, nothing to suggest he'd fallen through. He just disappeared. When we returned to base camp that evening, I checked the footage on my laptop. The camera had been running for nearly 2 hours before shutting off from the cold. The first half was what you'd expect. Static landscape shots, the shimmering aurora, Daniel adjusting focus. But around the 40-minute mark, he crouched near the lens, speaking quietly, almost like he was talking to himself. His voice was calm, but there was tension in it, that kind of nervous curiosity you hear from someone who's starting to doubt what's real. Then, he turned his flashlight toward the ice. The beam flickered over the surface, and for a second, I thought I saw movement beneath it. Just a ripple, maybe. But Daniel saw it too. He whispered something I couldn't make out and knelt closer, pressing his gloved hand against the ice. The audio picked up a faint tapping, rhythmic, deliberate. He froze. The tapping stopped. Then softly from the microphone, a muffled voice whispered something. It was so quiet I had to replay it a dozen times before I made it out. It said, "Daniel." His head snapped up, the camera jostling as he looked around. There was nothing but darkness. Then he turned the flashlight back to the ice, and that's when I saw it, a shape just below the surface. It looked human, but not quite. Too long, too distorted. Pale hands pressed upward against the underside of the ice, fingers spread wide. More hands appeared beside it, smaller ones, dozens of them. Daniel stumbled backward, the camera shaking as he scrambled to his feet. You could hear him breathing hard, muttering something like, "It's not real. It's not real." He ran, and the beam of light jerking wildly. But before he got far, the microphone picked up another sound. It wasn't the wind or ice shifting. It was laughter. Dozens of voices, faint and echoing, rising from beneath the frozen surface. The video cut off there. I remember sitting in silence after watching it, trying to tell myself it was fake, that cold and stress and isolation could make anyone hallucinate. But there was something about the clarity of the footage, the way his voice trembled, the precision of the tapping, that felt too real. When I showed it to my supervisor, he told me not to bring it up again. "It's not our job to explain what happened," he said. "We just report it." But I couldn't shake it. 2 days later, the lake thawed slightly. We were ordered to conduct a secondary sweep for any sign of a body. It was snowing hard that morning, the kind of thick, muffled snowfall that swallows sound. As we moved across the ice in a line, something beneath the surface caught my eye. A dark shadow maybe 20 feet out. I thought it was debris at first. Then I saw the shape of a hand. I dropped to my knees and brushed the snow away. What I saw underneath the ice didn't look like a person. The body, if you could even call it that, was blurred, distorted, like it wasn't frozen in the water but inside the ice itself. The face was pressed upward, eyes open, mouth stretched in a silent scream. And right next to it another face, smaller than another. I yelled for the others, but when they got there, the shapes were gone. "Just empty ice." They looked at me like I'd imagined it. Maybe I did. But when I stood up, I noticed something new. Small footprints circling where I'd been kneeling. Tiny bare prints pressed into the snow, leading away from the lake. We wrapped up the search that afternoon. No remains were ever found. Daniel Reeves was declared missing, presumed dead. But about 2 weeks later, his camera, the same one I'd handed to the investigators, was returned to the Iliamna police station. No one could explain how. It had vanished from the evidence locker. Inside it was a new SD card. The footage on it was brief, maybe 10 seconds, and completely silent. It showed Daniel standing on the ice just like before. But this time his eyes were wrong. They were white, cloudy, and he wasn't wearing any winter gear. He looked soaked, frozen. Behind him, in the reflection of the ice, you could see hundreds of pale faces pressing up from below. The file was dated 2 days after the official time of his disappearance. After that, the state declared the lake unsafe and closed the surrounding trails. Locals said they started hearing knocks at night again, 3 at a time coming from the direction of the water. One old man swore he saw children walking on the frozen lake under the moonlight, barefoot, their silhouettes bending as if the ice itself was breathing. I haven't been back since. But sometimes when I'm editing footage from other searches, I hear faint sounds on the recordings. The same soft tapping. 3 knocks, a pause. Then 3 more. It's like the ice is still trying to get someone's attention, and every now and then, when the file freezes or glitches for a second, I see a face, pale, half buried in static and staring back. I stopped telling people I was there. Most of them wouldn't believe me anyway. But whenever I see Daniel's name mentioned in those missing persons lists, I think about something Lewis, the old man who rented him the cabin, told reporters later. He said, "The lake never keeps the same souls twice. It gives one back every time it takes another." I don't know what that means, but last winter a new photographer went missing out there. Same spot, same time of year, and according to the report they found his camera too. It was still recording. My name's Trevor James, and I used to run a small travel vlog called Off-Grid Trekker. It wasn't a huge channel, maybe 40,000 subscribers, give or take, but it was growing. My niche was solo survival trips, going off the map for a few days with minimal gear and documenting it all. I loved it. The quiet, the challenge, the raw beauty of being completely alone. My last trip was supposed to be a simple 3-day shoot near Nome, Alaska. I called it the 72-hour off-grid challenge. It never made it past day 2. It was early March 2023 when I landed in Nome. The sky was a flat, endless grey, the kind of colour that swallows everything. The cold hit me like a wall the moment I stepped off the plane, brutal, dry and silent. I met a few locals at a diner near the airstrip, and when I told them what I was planning, their reactions ranged from amusement to mild concern. One guy, An older man with cracked hands and eyes like weathered glass, he told me, "You go out there past Council Road, you won't hear planes, won't hear nothing. Just the breathing." I laughed, thinking he meant the wind, but he didn't smile back. I rented a snowmobile from a small outfit called Arctic Motion and stocked up on essentials, rations, thermal gear, a solar charger, my drone, and my cannon. My plan was to follow a rough route east of Nome, near the old mining trails, film a bit of survival content, maybe some drone shots at night and come back after 72 hours. No phone service, no satellite connection, just pure off-grid footage. I wanted authenticity. I got it, too much of it. The first day was fine, cold but manageable. I filmed myself setting up camp near a ridge that overlooked a frozen valley. Beautiful terrain, totally untouched. I did some monologue stuff for the vlog. Introductions, gear checks, plans for the next 2 days. When I'd reviewed the footage that night, something odd caught my attention. During one of the drone clips, there was a faint distortion in the background and like static, but layered with something rhythmic. Breathing. I figured it was wind interference and didn't think much of it. That night, though, I had trouble sleeping. The wind outside the tent didn't sound like wind. It had pauses, slow inhales and exhales that seemed to circle around my camp. At one point, I swore I heard footsteps crunching in the snow just a few yards away. I grabbed my camera, hit record and whispered into the mic, "Something's moving outside." I waited, 5 minutes, maybe more, but the only thing the camera picked up was the faint sound of breathing. Not mine. Too deep, too steady. The next morning I found fresh tracks near my tent. They weren't boot prints. They looked like bare feet. 5 toes perfectly visible pressed into the snow. The weirdest part? The snow around them wasn't melted, as if whatever made them wasn't warm. I followed them for maybe 20 yards before they just stopped. No sign of where they went, just gone. I started recording everything after that. Every noise, every step. I told myself it was just paranoia from being alone too long in the cold. But deep down I knew something wasn't right. Around noon, I moved camp closer to the frozen creek, hoping the constant sound of running water would help me sleep. That's when I filmed the video everyone would later see, the one titled "Something's Following Me." I started it like any other vlog, upbeat, slightly nervous, trying to keep things light. "Hey guys," I said, "it's day 2 of the off-grid challenge. It's about -15 right now, but I'm holding up fine. Except I keep hearing something at night, like footsteps. And breathing. I think it's just the wind messing with me, but yeah, we'll see." I smiled for the camera, but it was forced. My voice shook near the end. About halfway through that recording, I turned the camera to show the landscape behind me, a flat stretch of snow and rock. That's when the wind picked up again, except it wasn't wind. If you listened closely, you could hear it. Long, slow breathing. People later said it sounded like it was coming from right next to the mic, but I remember standing there, feeling the air go still. There was no wind. I didn't notice it until later, but in the last few seconds of that video, just before I stopped recording, something moved in the background. A dark figure standing near the tree line. No details, just a shape. It didn't move like a person, more like it was gliding. That night, everything went wrong. My drone picked up motion just after 11 p.m. I was inside my tent, reviewing footage, when I got the alert on my phone. I switched to the live feed. The drone was hovering about 30 feet above my camp. I expected to see maybe an animal. But there was something else. A tall, thin figure standing near the edge of the light from my lantern. Completely still. I could only make out its shape. Elongated arms, head slightly tilted. It stood there for maybe 10 seconds before the feed cut out completely. I ran outside, flashlight in one hand, camera in the other. Nothing, just darkness and snow stretching endlessly. But the feeling of being watched was unbearable. I packed what I could and decided to head back to Nome first thing in the morning. I didn't care about the footage anymore. I just wanted to get out. I barely slept that night. Every time I started to drift off, I'd hear breathing, and not from one direction but all around me. At one point, the fabric of the tent pressed inward like something was leaning against it, exhaling slowly. I shouted, "Go away!" and the pressure stopped instantly. The silence that followed was worse. At dawn, I started the snowmobile and began the return trip. The engine kept stalling even though it was full of gas. Halfway back, the GPS froze, showing no signal, just static lines flickering across the screen. I decided to follow the ridgeline I'd used as a landmark. After an hour, I realized I was going in circles. My own tracks led back toward my first campsite. I was losing daylight fast. When I reached the old site, my stomach turned. There were footprints again, dozens this time, surrounding the burned-out remains of my campfire. All of them were barefoot, all of them leading toward the tent, none leading away. That was when I noticed the tent flap was open. I knew I'd zipped it before leaving. I approached slowly, recording everything. Inside it looked the same, except for the walls. They were covered in moisture, fogged up from the inside as if something had been breathing in there for hours. My sleeping bag was wet, like someone had lain in it. I stumbled back, panicking, turning off the camera. I didn't know where to go. Nome was 40 miles away. My snowmobile was acting up. I tried to calm myself, telling the lens, "Okay, guys, I think someone's messing with me out here. Maybe locals. Maybe a prank. I just need to get out." That was the last clip I filmed. The timestamp said 2:47 p.m., March 12th. The next morning, a local bush pilot spotted my snowmobile near the edge of the valley, engine still running, camera still mounted on the front. No sign of me anywhere. When the Nome police recovered the footage, they said it was corrupted, almost like it had been partially erased by interference. But one video remained intact, the upload that appeared on my YouTube channel hours after I disappeared. Something's following me. It went live at 3:02 a.m., March 13th, no one knows how. Locals who watched it say the background noise wasn't the wind. It was breathing, deep, slow, close enough that you could hear the frost breaking between inhales. And right before the video cuts to black, if you turn the volume up high enough, you can hear a voice whisper, soft, broken, childlike, "Don't leave." The police report listed Trevor James as missing, presumed dead. The official explanation was exposure, disorientation, hypothermia, maybe a snowstorm that disoriented him. But I've seen the footage. That's not what happened. My name's Alan Peters, and I was one of the 2 search and rescue officers who recovered Trevor's gear near the old mining trails east of Nome. I've been in this job almost 12 years. I've pulled people out of avalanches, overturned snow machines, even found bodies weeks after the thaw. But what I saw during that recovery still wakes me up at night. When we got the call, it had already been 4 days since anyone had heard from him. The weather had cleared up, and a bush pilot doing a routine flight spotted the snowmobile near the ridge. It was half buried in snow, still upright, and the headlight was faintly flickering. The weird part was the camera. It was mounted to the handlebars, pointing directly at the trail he must have come from. We assumed he'd set it up to document his return. I pulled the SD card and stowed it in a weatherproof case, planning to hand it off to the techs back in Nome. The rest of the camp was gone. Tent flattened, sleeping bag shredded by wind or maybe scavengers. But there was one thing that made me stop cold: the footprints. There were hundreds of them. Not random tracks like an animal would leave. Deliberate circling patterns around where the tent had been. Some were human-sized, others small, almost childlike. None of them had boot tread. Every single one looked bare. It didn't make sense. The temperature was well below 0. Anything barefoot out there wouldn't last 10 minutes. We followed the prints out toward the frozen creek. About 30 yards from the campsite, they suddenly stopped. No drag marks, no sign of collapse there. They just ended, like the people who made them had stepped off the earth and vanished. The snow was undisturbed beyond that point, smooth and unbroken. My partner, Nate, swore under his breath. I didn't blame him. The silence was suffocating out there. Even the wind seemed to avoid that valley. When we brought the footage back, we gave it to a tech named Rena to restore. Most of it was corrupted, distorted video, white static, audio cuts. But she managed to recover a few fragments. The first clip was from March 12th, around 3 p.m., right before Trevor's disappearance. The camera was mounted on his snowmobile, facing the trail ahead. You could hear the engine sputtering, the wind howling, and Trevor muttering something under his breath. Then the wind just stopped, like someone hit mute on the world. A few seconds later, a faint sound came through the mic. Slow, steady breathing. Deep. Not frantic or gasping, just deliberate, almost calm. Trevor must have heard it too, because the snowmobile slowed to a crawl. "Hello!" he shouted. The audio picked it up clearly. Who's there? No response. Just another inhale, exhale. Then the camera shook like something bumped the snowmobile from behind. He swore, turned it off, and that's where the clip ended. The next file was stranger. The timestamp said 2:58 a.m., about 12 hours later. But no one knows how the camera kept recording through the night. The footage started with the snowmobile still parked in the same place, engine cold. The lens pointed at the tree line. At first, nothing moved. Then slowly something appeared, a shadow gliding between the trees. Not walking, just moving like fog-taking shape. The form was tall, but its outline kept shifting. Too thin, too fluid. At one point, the figure seemed to bend forward, and the mic picked up that same breathing sound again. Rena turned up the volume to analyze it, and we all leaned in to listen. It wasn't wind. It wasn't mechanical feedback. It sounded wet. You could hear saliva in the throat, the faint rasp of air catching on vocal cords. Human, but not quite. We ran voice isolation filters on it, and that's when we heard something else layered beneath the breathing. A whisper, faint but unmistakable. It repeated one word over and over, "Stay." The tech froze the frame, zoomed in on the tree line. The shadow was gone, but there was something in its place. Dozens of shapes, smaller, barely visible. Children, barefoot, pale, standing in the snow. I remember the chill that hit the room then. One of the locals working with us muttered, "The little ones are back." When I asked him what he meant, he just shook his head and told me a story about miners who vanished near that same ridge in the 1930s. Their families said they heard children laughing outside the camps at night, even though no one lived within miles. Some of the men went out to investigate. None of them came back. The ones who stayed said they could hear the same slow breathing through the cracks in the cabin walls. The Nome police called it folklore, but I wasn't so sure anymore. A few days later, the FBI requested copies of all footage and GPS data. They locked everything down, said it was part of a wider digital forensics review. But here's the thing, before they took the camera, I checked the card one last time. There was a new video file, one that hadn't been there before. Time-stamped 2 days after we'd recovered the snowmobile. It started in complete darkness. Then a faint glow appeared, the same soft blue light of a camera indicator. You could hear slow breathing again, closer than before. After a few seconds, the camera adjusted focus. Trevor was standing in the frame, but not like before. His face was wrong. Pale, expressionless, eyes glazed over. He looked straight into the lens and his mouth opened, just slightly. No words came out, just the sound of air being drawn in, a slow, rattling inhale. Then the audio distorted, and behind him more figures appeared. Dozens, all staring. All breathing in unison. The clip ended abruptly after 12 seconds. The file metadata showed it had been uploaded remotely, through Trevor's own account. But that's impossible. His devices were in evidence. The locals say sometimes if you camp out near that ridge, your radio will pick up static, followed by breathing. Some people claim they've heard voices, faint but clear, whispering their names from the tree line. Others say the breathing stops the second you look toward the sound. One hiker who reported hearing it swore she saw a tall figure watching her through the fog. It wasn't moving, she said, just standing perfectly still, like it was waiting for her to stop looking. A few months later, I left the search and rescue unit. I couldn't handle the noise anymore. The silence, the recordings, the memory of those small, perfect footprints. Sometimes when I edit home footage or watch videos online, I think I hear that sound again. Slow, steady breathing under the background noise. It's faint, but always there. And I've noticed something strange about Trevor's old channel. YouTube marked it as inactive. But every few weeks it uploads a new short, just a few seconds long, always black screen. No description, but if you wear headphones you can hear it. That same quiet rhythm, inhale, exhale. And right at the end, before it cuts to silence, a whisper says, "You found me." When the Seward search and rescue team found them, the tourists were standing in a perfect line. 6 of them, all facing the same direction, toward the tree line. Their clothes were torn, their skin pale and frostbitten, and every single one of them had their hands pressed tightly against their ears. The youngest, a woman in her 20s, had dried blood between her fingers, as though she'd clawed at her own head trying to keep something out. It was late evening, the light fading fast over the Resurrection River Valley, and the wind was sharp enough to draw tears from your eyes. But not one of them shivered, not one turned to look when the rescuers called out. They just stood there unmoving, breathing in shallow, rhythmic gasps, as if trying not to hear something that the rest of us couldn't. The report says they were found 5 miles off trail, near an abandoned ranger station that hadn't been used since the 80s. Their van was discovered half submerged in a ditch 2 days earlier. Engine still warm, headlights still on, but there was no sign of the passengers. They were a part of a small tour group, 6 Americans, 1 guide, all from Anchorage. The plan had been a weekend trip to photograph the glaciers around Exit Glacier, then return before nightfall. What happened between that plan and their discovery remains officially undetermined. Unofficially, I've spent years trying to understand it. My name's Laura Mitchell. I'm a trauma nurse at Providence Seward Medical Center. I was on duty the night they brought those 6 people in. I still remember the smell of the snow on their clothes, the blankness in their eyes. There's something deeply wrong about seeing people who look alive but feel absent. Like their minds were left somewhere their bodies escaped from. They didn't resist when the medics guided them into the ER. They followed instructions like sleepwalkers, lifting arms, sitting down, drinking water when told. But the moment anyone spoke above a whisper, all 6 reacted the same way. They clutched their heads, screamed, and slammed their foreheads against the walls or beds. It wasn't just fear. It was agony. One of the doctors, thinking it might be a shared trauma response, tried communicating through gestures. They responded, barely, nods, slow, hesitant movements. But the second he said a single word out loud, all 6 went rigid and started shaking violently, their eyes rolling back. One of them, the older man, began to bleed from his ears. The others followed seconds later. It was like their bodies rejected sound itself. Within hours, they were sedated and transferred to isolation. We covered every monitor with foam to dull the noise, turned off the HVAC fans, even walked barefoot to keep the floor from squeaking. The silence on that ward was suffocating, so thick it pressed against your skin. I didn't realize how much comfort sound gives you until it was gone. After a few days, one of the patients, a woman named Clarissa, according to her ID, began to show signs of awareness. She wrote something down on a piece of paper, shaking the entire time. The note read, "It's not quiet enough." When I tried to ask what that meant, she just pointed toward the wall, her lips trembling. Then she covered her ears again and rocked back and forth. That same night, something strange happened. The nurse on the overnight shift, Daniel, reported hearing faint murmuring in the hall outside the isolation wing. He thought maybe one of the patients had started talking again. But when he opened the door, the sound stopped. He said it wasn't like normal speech. It was layered, like 6 or 7 voices whispering at once, all just out of sync. He swore it came from the air vent. The next morning, one of the patients was gone. No broken locks, no missing keys. The window was sealed. The bed still warm. The only trace left was blood, thin trails leading to the corner of the room where the wall met the floor. It wasn't smeared like someone crawling. It was dripping upward, as if gravity had lost its rules for a while. The police searched the entire facility. They found nothing, but they did find something outside. Footprints in the snow leading away from the hospital grounds. Bare footprints. I tried to look up the tour group's history, see if there was any clue about what they might have encountered out there. Most of them were nature enthusiasts, travel vloggers, photographers, the usual types who loved going off-trail. But there was one man in the group who stood out. The guide, a local named Ethan Greeley, former park ranger. No medical history, no criminal record. He was experienced, level-headed, exactly the kind of person you'd want leading a group into rough terrain. But Ethan was the one missing. He wasn't among the rescued 6. When I dug further, I found that Ethan had filed a last-minute itinerary change before they left Anchorage. He'd chosen a different trail, one that passed near a stretch of old forest marked on the maps as restricted terrain. It used to be a logging route back in the 1940s, abandoned after a series of accidents. Locals called it the Hollow Mile. I'd heard that name before. There's an old story among the Seward locals about a section of forest where the wind doesn't move right. You can stand in dead silence and hear echoes, voices repeating your own words seconds after you speak them. Hunters used to say it wasn't an echo at all. They said something beneath the ground repeated what it heard, not mimicking but listening, feeding on the sound. One of the old rangers, long retired, told me once, "That part of the forest don't keep your words safe. It takes them from you." After the patient vanished, Clarissa wouldn't sleep. She started writing messages constantly, in frantic, uneven letters. Most of them didn't make sense. Phrases like, "They learned our voices," or "We shouldn't have answered." But one line stood out, written over and over on different pages. "He told us to stop speaking." We didn't listen. On the 5th night, I was doing rounds when I saw movement through the small glass window of Clarissa's room. I thought she was having another episode. But when I looked closer, I froze. There was someone else inside with her, a shape standing just behind the bed, tall and motionless. I opened the door, heart pounding, but the figure was gone. Clarissa was sitting up, staring at the corner, her hands clamped to her ears. Her lips moved soundlessly, mouthing a single word: "Quiet." Then every alarm in the wing went off at once. Monitors flatlining, IV pumps wailing, power flickering. The sound made her thrash and scream, blood pouring from her nose. The other patients began doing the same in their rooms. The air filled with screams, raw, terrified, almost animal. Then all at once it stopped. Every alarm went silent. The light steadied, and all 5 remaining patients sat perfectly still, eyes wide open, blood drying on their faces. That night, the hospital evacuated the isolation wing. It was declared structurally unsafe after electrical interference. But the real reason? No one would go near it again. Even with all the power cut, staff swore they could hear faint whispers through the vents, like echoes of voices long gone. Still trying to speak, Clarissa's final note was found days later, hidden under her mattress. The handwriting was jagged, nearly unreadable. It said, "Sound belongs to them now." They sealed off the isolation wing 2 days after the power surge. Officially, it was for repairs and safety testing. Unofficially, no one wanted to be there anymore. Nurses complained of headaches, of hearing faint humming behind the walls. One janitor swore he heard someone whisper his name in a woman's voice while cleaning an empty hallway. The hospital administration blamed stress and fatigue, but I'd seen enough to know when fear is real. It lives in your gut, and once it moves in, it doesn't leave. After Clarissa's last note, "Sound belongs to them now," I couldn't stop thinking about what she meant. Who were they? What sound? And why did she act like silence was some kind of protection? I spent hours after each shift in the archives room, reading through the Seward search and rescue reports. That's when I found the one document that made my stomach twist, a field log from Ethan Greeley, the missing guide. It was marked restricted, but someone had forgotten to refile it properly. The log was from a week before the trip. It mentioned auditory anomalies near a disused section of the Resurrection Pass Trail, the same area where the group disappeared. Ethan wrote that he'd been hearing something under the snow, a vibration, faint but constant. At first he thought it was machinery or distant water movement, but when he listened closely, he said it almost sounded rhythmic, like breathing. He ended that entry with a note that still gives me chills. It stops when I stop moving, like it's waiting. After reading that, I drove out toward the area on my day off. It was about an hour from Seward, winding through the kind of back roads that make you feel like you're driving off the map. I parked near where the ranger station used to be and hiked in the rest of the way. The snow was deep but undisturbed. No footprints, no signs of wildlife. Just stillness. About 3 miles in, I reached the old ranger station. The roof had caved in years ago, and the front door was hanging off its hinges. Inside, everything smelled like rot and damp wood. I took out my phone and started recording a short video, just for documentation. There was nothing unusual, not at first, but when I played it back later, I noticed something I hadn't heard while standing there. A faint, low hum pulsing every few seconds. It wasn't wind, it wasn't static. It sounded alive. Then I saw the carvings on the inside wall. Dozens of small handprints, the kind kids make when they press their palms into mud, all arranged in strange spiral patterns. Some looked fresh. I reached out to touch one and the wood felt warm. That's when I heard it. Not loud, not clear, but definite. My own voice, whispering from somewhere behind me. "Laura." I froze. I didn't breathe. I turned slowly, scanning the shadows of the broken cabin. Nothing, just emptiness and the faint sway of snow dust falling through the roof beams. Then it came again, a little louder this time, a near-perfect imitation of my voice. Laura. It wasn't echoing. It was repeating. I bolted outside. My pulse was pounding so hard I could barely think. The moment I crossed the threshold, the sound stopped. I didn't wait to find out more. I ran back to the car, half slipping through the snow, and didn't look back once. That night, I sent the audio to a friend of mine named Ron, a sound engineer who occasionally helped with forensic recordings. I didn't tell him where it came from, just asked if he could isolate the noise. The next morning he called me, his voice shaky. "You need to tell me where you recorded this," he said. When I pressed him, he said the hum in the background wasn't interference. It was structured. Not random frequencies, but layered patterns that formed a kind of rhythm, too organized to be natural. He said it resembled something called acoustic mirroring, a phenomenon where sound waves reflect in unusual ways in enclosed spaces. But then he said something I'll never forget. The problem is, those reflections, they're responding, there's a call and response happening, like something's answering you. After that, I started to notice the silence differently. Even at home, when I turned off the TV or the heater, there was always this faint sense that the quiet was waiting. Like if I listened too long, I'd start to hear it breathing back. 2 weeks later, the missing guide, Ethan Greeley, was found. Or what was left of him. A group of hunters came across his remains near the same area I'd visited, only a few miles from the ranger station. They said his body was frozen solid, eyes open, mouth wide, as if he'd been screaming. But here's the part that still doesn't make sense. His tongue was gone. Not torn, not bitten, just missing. Cleanly. The police ruled it as animal activity. The hunters disagreed. There were no tracks around the body, not even his own. A few days after that, the hospital called me back in. The remaining patients, the 5 who hadn't disappeared, had started showing identical behavior at the same time. They would sit perfectly still for hours, hands over their ears, eyes darting toward the corners of the room. If anyone tried to speak, they'd shake violently and point upward, like something was above us. One night, while checking vitals, I accidentally knocked over a metal tray. The noise echoed through the room, loud, sharp. Immediately, all 5 patients began convulsing. Their monitors spiked. Then, through the chaos, I heard it again, whispering. Not from the patients, not from any machine, from the walls. It sounded like hundreds of voices murmuring at once, all overlapping, repeating the same thing. Be quiet. Be quiet. Be quiet. The sound grew louder, climbing in pitch until it felt like it was inside my skull. The lights flickered. One of the bulbs burst above my head, showering glass across the floor. I stumbled out of the room, slamming the door shut behind me. When I turned back through the window, the patients were sitting up, all 5 eyes open, bleeding from their ears, smiling. After that night, the wing was permanently shut down. The patients were transferred under federal jurisdiction, though no agency name was listed in the paperwork. I was told not to discuss it, but last week I received a padded envelope at my home address, no return label. Inside was a single SD card. On it were 6 short audio files, each one a few seconds long. The waveform looked normal until the end, where a spike of white noise distorted everything. I played the first file, a soft whisper, almost inaudible. "Laura, can you hear us?" The second file was quieter, but the pattern was the same, a rising hum, like breath through hollow wood. The third was worse. The whisper came back, but this time it wasn't my name. It said, "Not enough silence." The 5th file ended with a sound like someone dragging nails across metal, followed by a voice that wasn't human, deep, layered, like it came from somewhere too wide to exist. It spoke only one word. Listen. The 6th file is blank, or at least that's what I thought. When I boosted the volume and filtered the noise, I realized there was something faintly audible under the static. A loop. Repeating. It wasn't words. It was breathing. And when I turned off my computer, the sound didn't stop. It was still there, behind me, under the floor, in the walls. Now every night I sleep with earplugs in and music playing, anything to keep the quiet away, because I've realized something that Clarissa already knew. The silence isn't empty. It's hungry, and the moment you stop making noise long enough to hear it breathing, it starts listening back. My name's Patrick Hall, and until last year I drove tour buses for the Northern Roads Company out of Anchorage. I'd been doing that job for nearly 12 years, long enough to know every curve, every mile marker, and every weather mood swing between Anchorage and Fairbanks. That stretch of the park's highway is 360 miles of pure Alaskan unpredictability. 1 minute it's clear skies, the next whiteout conditions so thick you can't see your own damn headlights. But in all my years driving, I've never seen anything like what happened to Bus 142. It started on December 18th, a standard winter tour run. 14 passengers, a mix of locals heading north for work and a few tourists chasing the northern lights. The driver that night wasn't me. It was my friend and co-worker Dale Richardson. Good guy, careful driver, ex-Air Force, the kind of man who could keep calm through anything. They left Anchorage around 3 p.m., right on schedule. Weather report said light snow, nothing serious. The plan was to make the usual coffee stop in Talkeetna, then continue through the night to reach Fairbanks by dawn. The bus was equipped with satellite GPS and an emergency beacon. Routine, ordinary. But by 9 p.m., everything went wrong. The dispatcher in Anchorage got the first strange signal. The GPS started showing erratic data. The bus icon jumped back and forth along the same 10-mile stretch, like it couldn't decide where it was. Dale didn't respond to radio calls. At first, we thought it was interference from the storm that was moving in. Then the emergency beacon went off for 30 seconds before cutting out completely. A state trooper found tire tracks heading off the main road near mile marker 188, about 40 miles south of Denali National Park. They led straight into an unplowed service path that wasn't even supposed to be accessible in winter. The snow was coming down hard by then, and by morning the tracks were gone. So was the bus they searched for weeks. Helicopters, snowmobiles, dogs, nothing. It was like the bus had driven straight into the blizzard and never come back out. The company held a memorial in January, and Dale's family finally gave up hope. But I couldn't. Dale was too smart to just disappear. Something about it didn't make sense. Then, 6 months later in June, when the thaw came, a fisherman found the bus. It was sitting dead center on a frozen lake, 20 miles north of where the last GPS ping was recorded. The lake was called Mirror Lake, a shallow body of water surrounded by pine and tundra. Locals said it hadn't fully frozen over in years. Yet somehow the bus was perfectly balanced in the middle of it, resting on solid ice. The headlights were still on. The battery shouldn't have lasted more than a few days, let alone half a year, but there they were. Dim, flickering, like eyes that hadn't closed. I was one of the first to arrive on the recovery team. The air smelled wrong that day. Not decay, not rot, just wrong. Like ozone and burnt copper. When we stepped onto the ice, it didn't creak or groan under our weight. It felt solid, but too solid, like glass instead of frozen water. The bus doors were closed and locked from the inside. We had to pry them open. The moment the seal broke, a rush of cold air spilled out, colder than the air around us, sharp enough to make my eyes water. Inside, the interior was pristine. No signs of struggle. No blood, no damage. Just silence. 14 empty seats. Every personal item was still there. Coats, backpacks, phones, even coffee cups. It was like everyone had just vanished mid-conversation. Dale's hat was still on the driver's seat. His seatbelt was buckled tight. The engine was off, the keys still in the ignition. And yet the headlights stayed on. The first real clue came from one of the passenger phones. The battery was dead, but the data could be recovered. The last video recorded was time-stamped 9:43 p.m. on December 18th. The footage was shaky, pointing toward the front windshield. Outside was nothing but white, snow whipping in the high beams. You could hear the passengers murmuring, nervous but calm. Someone laughed about the storm being worse than expected. Then the bus slowed. Dale's voice said something about losing visibility and needing to pull over. That's when you hear it, faint at first under the wind. Close sound that didn't belong. It wasn't static or the engine. It was rhythmic, heavy, like footsteps crunching through snow circling the bus. The passengers heard it too. A woman asked, "Is there someone out there?" Dale told everyone to stay seated. The camera panned briefly toward the side window, and that's when something passed by. Just a blur. Darker than the snow, tall, too close to the glass. Someone screamed. The camera dropped. There's a scraping noise, like metal against metal, then static. The video ends there. The forensics team couldn't explain it. There were no footprints near the lake. No signs of anyone ever leaving the bus. The tires weren't even sunken into the ice, like it had been placed there instead of driven. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing Dale sitting there, buckled in, headlights glowing across that dead lake. The idea that he might have seen something before the others disappeared haunted me. A week later, while the bus was being transported to the Anchorage impound lot, I went to see it again. The site had been cleared, but the ice where it had rested hadn't melted, even in June. The temperature readings were 10 degrees colder in that exact spot. Inside the bus, something had changed. When I climbed in, the air smelled of damp soil. The floor was covered in a thin layer of frost, even though the day was warm. I ran my hand along one of the seats, wet. But it wasn't water. It was condensation, cold enough to burn. Then I noticed something no one had seen before. Near the back of the bus, on the inside of the fogged rear window, there was a word scrawled in frost. A single word written by hand below. I took photos and reported it, but by the next morning the word was gone. The glass was clean, dry. The bus was locked up after that, pending further investigation. But the night guard on duty swore he heard something coming from inside. A low hum, like the engine idling even though the keys weren't in. He said it grew louder when he tried to leave, like the bus was breathing. That was 2 weeks ago. Yesterday they asked me to help transport the bus to Fairbanks for final analysis. They want to run some kind of geological tests, see if the ice samples or air inside show abnormalities. I agreed, mostly because I need closure. I need to know what happened to Dale. But there's one thing I haven't told them. When I checked the maintenance logs before leaving Anchorage, I found something that made my blood run cold. The GPS system on that bus, the same one that went haywire before the disappearance, had stored one final coordinate entry before going offline. It wasn't anywhere near Fairbanks or the highway. It was 42 miles north of Mirror Lake, right in the middle of a place that doesn't exist on any current map. A blank zone. And tomorrow, I'll be driving the bus right through it. When they finally got the bus out of the lake, the first thing the rescue team noticed was that the inside was wrong. The temperature outside was -20, but when they opened the doors, warm air poured out. Thick, stale, almost humid. Like it had been sealed for years. Inside, the seats were dry. No sign of frost, no ice on the windows, nothing. It was like the cold hadn't been able to touch it. The food wrappers, the blankets, the luggage, everything sat perfectly in place. Even the tour guide's clipboard was still hanging from the dashboard. The last page of attendance marked off at passenger 14 checked in. The driver's seatbelt was fastened, but there was no driver. His name was Thomas Reeve, 42 years old, ex-Air Force mechanic turned tourist driver. His wife told investigators he was one of those men who didn't scare easy. Flew helicopters in Afghanistan, worked oil rigs in the dead of winter. She said he was meticulous, always followed routes, always reported check-ins. His last GPS ping came in around 10:47 p.m., about 40 miles from Fairbanks. Then nothing. The dispatcher tried calling him 3 times before the line went dead. When the state troopers ran diagnostics on the bus, they found the engine had died precisely 6 hours after that last ping, which meant it had been running for hours after everyone inside had already vanished. The lights, too, had been left on deliberately, the switch still in the on position. But the thing that chilled them most was what they found on the windshield right above the wipers. Faint, like frost that had been half wiped away, were handprints. Dozens of them. Small, thin, child-sized hands pressed against the glass from inside. I talked to one of the troopers later, years after the story went cold. His name was Mark Jensen. He was the one who first climbed into the bus that night. He told me he'd never forget the smell. Not of decay, but of metal and something sweet like burnt sugar. He said he'd walked row by row counting seats. 14 passengers, but not a single belonging matched any of them. He found coats too small, shoes that didn't fit, even a teddy bear under one of the seats, one nobody remembered packing. It was like they'd switched, he said. Like the people who'd been there weren't the ones meant to be. The black box camera, mounted above the dashboard for insurance, had recorded most of the drive. The footage started normal. Passengers laughing, taking photos, a woman humming near the back. At around 9:30 p.m., visibility dropped as the blizzard thickened. Snow whipped across the windshield, whiteout conditions. Thomas slowed the bus, radioing in for an update. His voice was calm. He told dispatch, "It's getting bad, but we'll make it." Then, halfway through the recording, something odd happens. One of the passengers, a man in a red parka, turns to the window and stares outside for almost 2 full minutes, unblinking. The others begin to notice one by one, until the chatter dies down completely. The bus is silent except for the wipers and the wind. Then, faintly, you can hear it. A sound not coming from inside the bus, but outside, like something brushing along the metal. Slow, scraping, moving from front to back. Thomas leans forward, glancing into the side mirror. You can see his face change. His mouth opens slightly. Not fear exactly, but confusion. He says something you can't quite hear, turns off the cabin lights and peers into the snow. Then, very softly, one of the passengers whispers, "There's someone walking out there. The problem is..." They were at least 60 miles from any town. The rest of the recording is chaos. A scream, muffled but sharp. The bus jerks to the side. The camera tilts and you can hear Thomas shouting at everyone to stay seated. A loud thud hits the roof. Then another. Something heavy. You can hear the metal groaning like the frames being bent from above. One passenger starts praying. Then, right before the footage cuts, Thomas says something that still makes me shiver every time I think about it. "If you see it, don't look back." The video stops there. The investigators sent the footage to Anchorage for digital recovery. It came back corrupted. The last 5 minutes overwritten by static that sounded eerily like breathing. When they checked the tire tracks on the frozen lake, they realized something even stranger. The bus hadn't driven onto the ice. The tracks ended at the treeline, then started again halfway across the frozen lake, as if the bus had been placed there. No broken ice, no trail behind it. Just perfect snow and a single set of prints. Small human-like footprints circling the bus again and again before vanishing toward the woods. Locals in Fairbanks have their own version of what happened. They say the route between Anchorage and Fairbanks cuts through old ground, sacred land used by the Alaskan tribes long before highways and tour buses. They tell stories about the winter walkers, spirits of travelers who died lost in snowstorms and now wander in the white, looking for warmth. They say if you stop to pick them up, you'll never reach your destination. Months later, one of the missing passengers, a woman named Kara Olson, was found wandering near a riverbank, 70 miles south of where the bus was recovered. She was barefoot, frostbitten, and couldn't remember her own name. The doctors said her body temperature was abnormally low, yet she showed no signs of hypothermia. When they questioned her, she only said one thing. Over and over, "He told us not to look back." When they showed her a picture of Thomas, the driver, she stared at it for a long time and whispered, "He's still driving." Then she began to scream until they sedated her. A few months after that, a fisherman on Lake Iliamna swore he saw headlights moving beneath the ice, 2 faint beams gliding slowly in the dark water. When the search team checked, they found nothing but the faint outline of tire tracks under the surface. They eventually closed the case, calling it an unsolved disappearance. The bus was towed and locked in an impound lot in Anchorage, sealed for investigation. But the security guard on night duty quit after his second shift. He said sometimes the headlights would flicker on by themselves, and if you stood close enough, you could hear the faint hum of an engine idling, like someone was waiting for the next group of passengers. Every few years, the story resurfaces. Someone claims to see a yellow tour bus on that same stretch of highway during whiteouts, headlights bright through the snow, but when drivers pull over to let it pass, there's nothing there. Just the sound of tires crunching in the distance, fading toward Fairbanks. And if you ever drive that route in winter and your radio cuts out, and you think you hear something breathing through the static, don't stop. Keep going, because sometimes they say, the bus that never reached Fairbanks still makes its rounds, looking for someone to take the empty seats. If you made it this far, you might want to check your rearview mirror. Some roads never stay empty for long. Don't forget to subscribe to Shadow Fear, where the darkness never sleeps and neither will you.